So, a really tragic incident up in Minneapolis has kicked off this huge nationwide debate about the rule of law. But for one governor, it's also a moment to really draw a line in the sand. In this explainer, we're going to break down how Pennsylvania's governor, Josh Shapiro, is using this moment to try and redefine what it means to govern in a very divided America.
But before we dive into all the political maneuvering, Shapiro wants everyone to remember one thing. At the heart of this is a human tragedy. By starting right there with the personal cost, he's really framing his entire argument around what it means to lead with empathy, not just politics. Okay, so what kicked all this off? A fatal shooting in Minneapolis that involved an ICE agent. But it's really the federal government's response that, at least in Shapiro's view, has turned what was a local tragedy into a national crisis of trust. And this is where Shapiro's argument gets really pointed. He's not just talking about some simple breakdown in communication here. He's arguing that by, quote, icing out the local law enforcement, the federal government is actively tearing down the very foundation of public safety, and that's community trust. So this has blown up way beyond just one incident. It's now about a really fundamental question, one that cuts right to the heart of our democracy. Is anyone above the law? And right now, there are two very different answers being put on the table. So on one side, you have Senator JD Vance speaking for the administration's viewpoint. And he made this really striking claim that the federal agent involved has total immunity. And that idea, well, it sets the stage for a major clash over what accountability really means for federal officers. To really get the weight of that claim, we've got to understand what absolute immunity even means. It's this legal concept that basically suggests a government official can't be held responsible criminally or in a civil court for their actions no matter what they are. It's a really powerful and, frankly, very controversial idea. And that brings us right to Shapiro's response. He flat out calls the idea of absolute immunity a fiction. For him, the rule of law means exactly what it says. One set of rules that applies to absolutely everyone, without fear or favor. In his view, nobody gets a free pass. So what Shapiro is doing here is pretty clever. He's using this one moment to frame a much bigger choice for voters. This isn't just about a single incident anymore. It's about two completely different ways to govern. One he calls chaos, and the other cooperation. And this slide, well, it really lays out the stark contrast he's trying to paint. On one side, he sees a federal government acting as an injector of chaos, and on the other, his own administration in Pennsylvania. He says they're so committed to cooperation that they're even running tabletop exercises, think of them like practice drills, to figure out how to keep the peace if and when federal actions might spark unrest in his state. Now look, this isn't just him taking a shot at the federal government. This is the foundation of his entire political brand. He's taking this philosophy of cooperation and boiling it down into a really simple, powerful campaign promise. Get stuff done. And here's the number he holds up as proof that his model is actually working. Shapiro claims that because his administration has focused on building trust between communities and law enforcement, the very thing he says is missing at the federal level, gun violence in Pennsylvania is down a staggering 42%. And his argument goes way beyond just crime. He points to a whole track record of accomplishments, things like record funding for education and cutting taxes. And he makes sure to emphasize that he did all this while working with a divided state legislature. That's the core of his pitch, that his cooperative approach actually gets results. But we all know that in a swing state like Pennsylvania, just appealing to your own base isn't going to cut it. So how does a Democrat like Shapiro actually win over Republicans and independents? Well, the answer seems to lie in a very specific and very personal political strategy. This is the million-dollar question for any candidate in a purple state, right? And Shapiro's answer isn't about changing his core beliefs. It's about how he tackles the specific concerns of voters who might not have supported him before. He says the key is pretty simple. You show up, you listen, and then you deliver. He specifically goes after what he calls buyer's remorse among people who used to vote for Trump. He connects with them on these tangible kitchen table issues. Farmers who are getting hurt by tariffs, small businesses that are struggling, the loss of healthcare in rural areas. He argues that these voters feel like they just got screwed, and he's positioning himself as the guy who can actually deliver practical solutions. So when you boil it all down, it really comes down to a choice between two very different visions of leadership. One defined by confrontation and claims of immunity, the other by cooperation and a promise to just get stuff done. Shapiro is betting that in a country that is tired of all the division, that second option is going to win out.
The question for voters in Pennsylvania, and maybe for the rest of the country, is whether they agree.